Hello and welcome. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all here. My name is Fabio Gigi. I'm the chair of the Japan Research Centre here at SOAS, and it's an honor to be the host tonight for this event with the president of the Royal Academy of Arts, Rebecca Salter. This event is co-organized by the Japan Research Centre, by the Japan Society, and by the Japanese Women's Association in Great Britain. And the idea was first brought to me by Dr. Mary Arichi, who's standing here next to me, who is one of the stalwarts, I can say, of SOAS, of the Japan Research Centre. She has organized countless events. She has carried the torch for art history here at SOAS, and I'm grateful to her for joining me here tonight. The other interlocutor, also a very good friend of SOAS, is Jenny White. Jenny White will be known to you as the CEO until this year of the Great Britain Sasakawa Foundation. She has worked for the British Council before that. I actually had a look at the CV, and there's so many postings in so many countries and so many contributions to the development of arts and cultures that I really don't want to go into any more details. Rebecca Salter will be introduced by Dr. Arichi in a second. I just want to apologize. It's not that I've started chain smoking at the age of 45, but you know, sometimes this happens. Sometimes one year you find, the next year you have an allergy, and it sort of comes out of nowhere. And that's why I think in Italian you say allergia and allegria are very close together, and both happen in spring. So cheerfulness and allergy, these are the two things that we have to deal with. So thank you very much. I hand over to Dr. Mary Arichi. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio, for that introduction. And thank you for the Japan Research Centre for providing this venue this evening. And thank you, everybody, for coming today. It's a pleasure to see you all. And I am very happy that Rebecca has found a time in her busy schedule to come here today. So, Rebecca Salter is the current president of the Royal Academy of Arts, the position she has held since 2019. And I have to look at this. She is the first woman president of the Royal Academy. She is the 20th established in 1768. And in recognition of her contributions to the arts, she was appointed CBE, Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. She received this CBE in the 2025 New Year Honours. Now, we know that Rebecca went to Japan after graduating from the Bristol Polytechnic, and she stayed there for 6 years. And she studied printmaking, and she has published a book on Japanese popular print as well. So she has a very close connection with Japan. And Rebecca was elected as the Royal Academy academician in the category of printmaking in December 2014 and became keeper of the Royal Academy in June 2017. Her artistic practice integrates painting and printmaking with a particular focus on the interplay between the two disciplines. Until 2016, she served as an associate lecturer on the MA Printmaking Course at Camberwell College of Art, University of the Arts, London. She exhibits regularly in London and internationally. And in 2011, her work was the subject of the major retrospective In the Light of Things at the Yale Center for British Art in New Haven, Connecticut. And today, I notified Sadako Oki from the Yale Center, and she will be joining a little bit later online. Yes, so thank you, Rebecca, for coming today, and we shall start straight away. Can you hear me? Yeah, good. So I've already mentioned Rebecca went to Japan straight after graduating from Bristol Polytechnic. And my first question is, why did you choose to go to Japan? Did you know a lot about Japan before you went?
Thank you. And thank you for the introduction. That's a very good question. And the older I get and the further away I get from graduating in 1977, the more I think it was an eccentric decision. Because in 1977, all my fellow art students wanted to go to New York because that was where it was happening. But I'd had an obsession with Japan since I was a child, and I decided to go in the opposite direction. It did actually take me 2 years to get there, because if you try, and even now I don't know how it happened without the internet, because how did I know? No idea, no idea. But I did get there ultimately in 1979, and I spent 2 years as an overseas foreign student in the Kyoto City University of the Arts. And I actually studied ceramics because that's what I'd done my degree in here. And I was supposed to be studying raku, which I did for a while, but I then realised I didn't have the right personality for ceramics, so I stopped. You need to be very patient for ceramics, and you need to be able to deal with the fact that you've done a lot of work and you put it in the kiln and it falls apart. So I wasn't very good at that level of disappointment.
Well,
basically.
I've got a question which follows on from that, actually. From your experience in Japan, how do you see the distinction between art and craft, especially in relation to cultural differences between the UK and Japan? Because in the UK, we tend to talk about fine art and craft, and they're often separated, whereas in Japan, they seem more fused together. I'm just interested in your views on it.
I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, in Japan, it's almost not even something that's spoken about, but it's such a big issue here, or it was. I do think things are changing. I think now, even within fine art, there are more conversations about actually making. And I think the more time people are spending on screens and using those sort of technologies, the more there is an appetite amongst students for actually making things. And so that hierarchy, whereas painting was always seen to be full of ideas and craft was just making things, I think now they're coming together. And it's very interesting, at the Royal Academy, we had taken out, I mean, back in the day, I don't know when people lost interest, we'd taken out kilns and ceramics and things like that. And we've now had to put them back in because students really, really want to make stuff. And also because a lot of undergraduate courses now in art schools are such that it's quite hard. You don't necessarily get studio space. I mean, when I was a student, we were each given a bit of space, and that was our space, and we worked in it. Now there's a lot of hot desking, or hot studioing, I suppose you'd call it. And so we find a lot of students are coming off undergraduate courses and they've never had the opportunity to make an etching, for example, because all those things need time and equipment and space. So we're doing I mean, I hesitate to call it remedial work, but we're giving students opportunities at the postgraduate stage that in my day we all had much earlier in our careers to actually make things. Yeah.
Is it more kind of a multi, kind more interaction between the disciplines?
I think there's more sort of cross-disciplinary work, more mixed media. And I think the truth is when artists are looking at the work of other artists or at the world, I don't know that artists have a hierarchy. Because I've talked about this in relation to Japanese woodblock prints, because if you talk to Japanese woodblock print experts, they're very clear that prints were extraordinary up until this point. And then the woodblock printmakers started using artificial colours and everything went downhill after that, if you talk to print experts. But if you talk to artists, they actually don't mind about that. They just find them visually exciting. So there's a sort of broadness to the influences that artists take from. And I think now what you would traditionally have been called craft. So at the moment at the Royal Academy, we've just started hanging the summer exhibition. Now, 100 years ago, for example, stitching or embroidery I'm the first woman president. They weren't very involved. But, you know, we were looking at the sent-in work yesterday and there was an extraordinary number of pieces that were produced using tapestry or stitching.
Wonderful.
And it's not an issue.
Yes, interesting, isn't it? And well, going back to Japan, when you went to Japan, first you were studying ceramics, and then you decided to change to printmaking. And you studied printmaking at the college. And yes, your training, was it more kind of traditional ukiyo-e style printmaking, or were you encouraged to more experimental?
Well, this is where, again, so I had naively gone to art school in Japan with the sort of idea of being in a British art school, which was, you know, I was in the ceramics department, but I was very interested in printmaking, so I did printmaking as well. So I'd assumed when I went to art school in Kyoto, I'd be able to sort of go to different departments, but it was much stricter than that, and you were supposed to sort of come out of the door you'd gone in, so to speak. And when I looked around to see if I could change to printmaking, they did in the university screen printing and lithography and etching, but no Japanese woodblock. So I went looking for somebody who could teach me, and I found the printmaker Kurosaki Akira, who was actually teaching at another university in Kyoto. And he had been quite bold, because he had studied printmaking and he had then gone round and learnt in a traditional carving workshop how to carve. Then he'd gone to a traditional print workshop and learnt how to print. Then he dared to do both things himself. And so he was very, very keen on teaching people to do both, because traditionally the carvers carved and the printers printed, and there was no blurring of the lines. So he not only taught in one of the other art schools in Kyoto, but he'd also taught extensively abroad. So he'd done classes in the States. So also he was very generous when kind of foreigners like me turned up and said, well, you know, can I learn woodblock printing over the summer? You know, this is something where you get your apprentice for 10 years normally. So he was very generous in saying, okay, let's give it a go. So I joined one of his summer courses and learnt the basics from him, and then just adapted it for the way I wanted to work. But he was a really pivotal person in not only teaching students in Kyoto, but there are people all over the world who were taught by him.
Fortuitous meeting.
It was, yeah.
I wonder if I can bring you back to the UK and
Use the microphone, ladies.
and if we can bring you back to the UK and your role as president of the Royal Academy, because we're often asking about what this means. And we're hoping to pick up a few tips on how you convey your confidence as a president and perhaps win over some of the other Royal Academicians.
Well, so the role is the president is elected by your fellow academicians. There are roughly 120 of them, and they range in the age range is extraordinary, from early 40s to 105. So we have one academician she will be 105 in June, another academician who will be 102 on Saturday. So if you play your cards right as an academician, you can have a very long life. I think the secret to both of them is they still paint every day. They are extraordinary lessons to us all. And one of them, the one who's 105, Diana Armfield, she joins our assembly meetings online and votes online. I mean, she is extraordinary with the help of her son. So the president, I'm elected by my peers. And I was elected in December 2019. And at the time, that seemed okay, because of course, none of us knew what was going to happen.
Yes, of course.
In March 2020. But the role So I oversee, well, I sort of oversee everything, but I have at the moment we have an interim chief executive, but we hope to have a new one soon. So I work with the chief executive, but the chief executive is the person who knows how to run an arts organisation, because I certainly don't. So I rely heavily on the chief executive and the senior team. But that's roughly how it works.
Yes, and then that leads on to my question. When you became the president in 2019, as you said, in 2020, what happened was the total lockdown. So it must have been really difficult for you what to do with when nobody was coming to the Royal Academy.
It was more than difficult. It was terrifying. And I can remember walking across the courtyard and out through the gate with the chief executive on, I think, March the 17th, because the writing was on the wall. And we were in the position where we thought it was in some ways better to lock down preemptively and do it properly. And I think, like everybody else, naively, we thought we'd be back in 2 weeks, which of course we weren't. We were losing £1 million a month, because not everybody knows this, but the Royal Academy never has had public funding. So we have to raise every penny, either from ticket sales or philanthropy or selling people things in the shop or tickets or whatever. So that was pretty terrifying. And of course, exhibition programs are incredibly finely tuned and planned between 3 and 5 years ahead. And so what happened was that all around the world, these exhibitions, which we'd all carefully timetabled so that they open somewhere and then they'd come to us and then they'd go somewhere else, they were all stuck. Which may seem simple, because you could say, well, when everybody unlocks, we can just carry on. But the difficulty is that for some works of art, for example, works on paper, they can only be shown for a certain amount of time before they then have to be put away in the dark for 5 years. So then you discover half your exhibition's gone. And it was like a massive bowl of spaghetti, and you kind of pull on one end and see where it went and where your exhibition had gone. It was extraordinarily complicated to unscramble, and we are still dealing with the fallout from that, because it left sort of Swiss cheese-like holes in the programme, and it's very difficult to put together, particularly a main gallery show at the Royal Academy. I mean, those galleries are huge, and there are very few exhibitions that can fill those spaces. If you've been planning on it for 5 years, they don't just sort of fall off a tree and you can fill the space. But one of the best things we did, so all the way through all the lockdowns, my chief executive and I, we wrote ourselves a letter. We called ourselves, we said we were essential workers, because we had 24-hour security in the building, rattling around in those huge buildings. And at the time, the exhibition we had in the building was Picasso on paper, worth I don't know how many noughts. And so every Saturday morning, the chief executive and I, we used to bake cakes and cycle into the Royal Academy and have distanced tea and cake with our security staff, who were quite lonely, really, because rattling around that building on your, there'd be 2 of them or something, terrible. Within 2 weeks of lockdown, weeds had grown between the flagstones in our courtyard. So I went in thinking this was rather wonderful. And I said to the security staff, I said, it's amazing, you've got weeds in the courtyard. And I loved it. I'd been quite happy to leave. Anyway, the next week I turned up and they'd gone. And it was that point that I realised, when you're president, you've got to be very careful what you say, because people will think you're cross. So I've been very careful ever since about what I say.
Yes. So you were really busy as president. Yes.
Yeah.
But you had an exhibition quite recently. Last year in September, you had exhibition of your work, paintings.
Yeah.
And those huge paintings, we are seeing some.
Yes, you're seeing some of them rotating through.
Yes.
Yeah.
They look very time-consuming, very detailed work. And my other question is, do you have an image from the beginning of those works? Or does it kind of
I have to have something, because they're very carefully planned, because I stretch the canvas after I've finished. So you can't do anything after you've stretched it. You have to deal with what you've got. So I have to plan, I have to map them out really carefully, get the size accurate, because you can't change that. One of the decisions I made when I became president, and it became very clear that my life was going to be constantly interrupted, I decided, rather than, because I've hardly got any time, I could just do lots and lots of really tiny pictures, because that's the only time I've got. But then I thought it'd be really depressing when you stop being president if all I've got is a studio full of miniatures. So what I did was a bit counterintuitive. I thought, I'm only going to do maybe 2 or 3 big paintings a year, whatever I can do, and that will be it. Slightly odd decision, but there we are. Jenny looks very worried.
I just think they're marvellous, even this size, blown up this size. And there is a tremendous sense of texture in your art, if I may say so. And what I'd like to ask you is, it's like there's an inherent paradox, because at one point it's very silent, and at the other point it's moving. And then it's almost when you go close to your painting, you can hear a sort of musicality. And I've noticed that you've actually done a recent project with a composer, Max de Wardener.
Yeah.
And you've also, it seems, moved from ceramics to woodblock printing and works on paper. So I suppose really I've got lots of questions I want to ask you, which is, what were you seeking in that transition? And did anything from your experience way back with ceramics carry through all those mediums to the work you're doing today?
I think very clearly the and you have to just make this very Japanese movement and use that word that's very popular now of hapticity, you know, that you can read the texture with your eyes. That's very, and to me, making actually is very, very, I mean, the actual business of making them. And also I'm a bit obsessed with making them beautifully. So I always like sometimes I show the backs, but I haven't got any pictures on this one. You know, I want them to be a beautiful object, because instead, I don't necessarily see them as a surface. If you think of Western painting, it's very much about the canvas is a sort of substrate which carries the paint, and it's the paint which carries the meaning. Whereas if you think of Eastern materials, where the colour, because it's water-based, the colour goes, and you're working on paper or silk, the colour goes right into the being of the basic material. So you are actually making an object. So I worked initially using Japanese paper, washi, and that's, so of course, it was very easy to do that with washi, but then you move back here and you think, well, now what am I going to do? So I've spent the last, I don't know how many decades, trying to work out a way of using, so I use linen and muslin, which gives me that feeling of beyond that you get with Japanese paper, because you can see through it, you can see both sides. Does that answer your question? It's a continuum.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and going back to the project with Max de Wardener, this was, so I'd never used moving image, but I really like his work, his compositions, because they have space in them. And I think within my work, I create space. So we thought it would be interesting to work together, but he didn't want to compose a soundtrack to my work, and I didn't want to produce illustrations of his music. So we worked completely separately. And I experimented with projections and all sorts of things and made lots of, you know, short bits of film. And what he did was he took 4 instruments, a sho and a koto, and I think a clarinet and a cello, if I remember correctly. But he retuned them. He retuned the sho and the koto so they fitted the Western musical tuning. And he worked together with the musicians. And so he produced music and I produced the images. And then we worked with, actually, the person who did the editing was a student at the Royal Academy Schools. And it was as if they meshed together, as if by magic. But I think that's because we fundamentally were both interested in the same thing, which was producing space within the work. It is on my website if you want to. Oh no, actually it's on the Royal Academy website. It's
On the Royal Academy website.
if you want to listen to it. It's the whole thing's up there.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple more questions I want to squeeze in, if I may. Going back to your role of president, and again, I think we're all hoping to get some tips and tricks from you on how you manage to divide this eminent role as president, which places you very much in the public eye. And it seems so different from, if I may say, a kind of zone of solitude that you might have to have in doing your work. I mean, how long does it take you to switch, or can you?
Well, that's the bit that's, because my predecessor, when I was elected, as my predecessor as president walked out of the front door, he said to me, my only piece of advice is do the 3 days, Monday to Wednesday, turn your phone off, don't look at emails until the next Monday. And I said, yes. However, when you're hit by a crisis like COVID, when you're losing £1 million a month and you're the president of the organisation, you cannot switch your phone off. And for 18 months, I had a phone conversation every evening with the chief executive for nearly an hour, just to get us through that crisis. So the biggest difficulty for me, and it's still the same now, is actually being able to close the studio door and know that I won't have to think about the Royal Academy for at least 8 hours.
And so is the physical act of shutting your studio door enables you to?
No, it doesn't.
So how long-
No, because it's things still come in. So it's very, very hard. And I think actually COVID has made it worse, because I think before COVID, if the president wasn't physically in the building, that was it. But now, because, everybody works remotely on Mondays, those barriers are much, much harder to draw.
People send you emails.
People send me
all
emails
the
and things,
time,
yeah. But also, I think, these roles of being, so there are 4 officers of the Royal Academy. There's the president, the keeper who looks after the schools, and the treasurer. And those 3 must be Royal Academicians, which means we've all got other jobs. And then the secretary and chief executive, who historically literally did write the letters, but that is now our chief executive and is not a Royal Academician. But of course, when those roles were invented, the Royal Academicians were generally, not sole traders, but they were single artists in their studio with an easel painting away, probably within walking distance of the Royal Academy originally. So it was easy to do both. But when I look particularly when I look at the younger generation of academicians, they've got global careers. So they're flying around the world to art fairs and exhibiting all over the place. And, in 30 years' time, 40 years' time, whether there will be an academician who's got the time to give 3 days a week to being president. So I think the roles, they will have to change probably.
Well, our last question is really your advice that you give to, for an artist of such eminence that you're doing, and what advice would you give to an artist? Because it's still fairly unusual that you have such a senior leadership position and you're an artist, and it's always that tussle of priorities. What would you say to younger artists today, if from your experience?
My experience.
You could share with us, perhaps.
So this is not necessarily to do with the Royal Academy, but from my experience, one of the most difficult questions is when you go somewhere and you go, go to a friend's house for dinner and you sit down and somebody says, I'm a lawyer and I'm a this, and you say, I'm an artist. And the next question, either it's, do you do portraits? Which obviously I don't. Or it's, are you successful? And what you know is that they are trying to figure out, are you famous? And do you sell a lot of paintings for a lot of money? And so what you have to work out for yourself is you have to define success, because for a lot of your career, you may not have a gallery, or you may sell work for a while and then all of a sudden it stops selling. So if you define success using those criteria, then you can make yourself very miserable. So I made a decision that as far as I'm concerned, if I've made a piece of work that I'm moderately pleased with and I've put it in a drawer or stored it somewhere, that's success for me. If it finds its way into the world, that's very nice, but you can only control so much. That's the only bit I can control. And I made another decision back in early 2000s when by sheer accident, I'd had an exhibition in Japan and America and here, very back to back, which on one hand seemed very glamorous. And then on the other hand, I thought, I think on balance, I don't want to become the sort of artist on whom the sun never sets. They're exhibiting all over the world all the time and have massive studios full of people. So I decided that there will only be the amount of work I can do, the number of hours I'm in the studio. And that's fine. I don't know if that's good advice or not. I doubt it, actually.
It's now time to throw it out to the audience, I believe, to see. I think that is very good advice. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much all for coming. Let's give a big round of applause for Rebecca's daughter. Thank you. I would also like to thank Dr. Maria Ricci and Jenny White, the interlocutors for today. And Kyoko Tachibana from the Japan Society, who also helped us organize this event. There is a sake reception outside. There are some nibbles and a lot of sake. So please go out and mingle, and do come back for the next lecture series that will start again in September. So thank you very much, and